It's a joy to join you in this beautiful park and on a beautiful topic on terra madre, but here in the vast country, Amalura. Added to my vocabulary of the diversity of names that the living earth has. And what are the qualities of Amalura? And what are the qualities that we need to bring into our lives to be in alignment with the laws she sets? Because my decades of both activism and study, I have learned there's only one definition of sustainability. Do you follow the laws that Amalura sets for you, or do you violate them? The word sustainability can be twisted in all kinds of directions for all kinds of content. But the process is one process. Is it for nature, through nature? One quality of Amalura is constructive interference, not destructive interference. And constructive interference means that the vibrations of one being and the vibration of the other being add up to create the resonance and harmony and balance. Machines have a tough time, They have a tough time coexisting, as you can see, between facility of my listening with one gadget and my speaking through another gadget. They don't get it right. And yet you're doing both, as is that beautiful peacock outside, which wants to be part of the round table today. I find that, because we have a very beautiful campus for nature, from nature, and we have courses for the Earth democracy. I have one or two flyers which I can give to anyone who's interested. But it's just when a particular focus is on the Earth, suddenly all the crows and storks start trying to scream and join in the conversation that we too are living. We are here. We are participants with you in the Earth family. And in an interesting way, this is becoming evident. I just got a message from a 90-year-old person in the United States with whom I have worked on the common good, on ecological economics. We've done a lot of work together. And today he asked me about breeding. And I'll come to that later in the discussion. How there's a big difference between industrial breeding and breeding that the earth does and breeding that human communities do in accordance with the earth laws. So there are two sets of laws. One comes from powerful men who want everything. They will never be satisfied, never be satisfied. Like yesterday, there was an interview after the talk, and this lovely journalist, said, we're constantly being pushed to buy first the yellow T-shirt, and then the white T-shirt, and then the white T-shirt with the purple logo, and there's always another T-shirt you must buy. I said, that's the problem with buying. It's never enough. Whereas there's always enoughness in all living systems. They know when enough is enough. They don't take more than they share. They can't. Whereas the market is something that allows you to think there's no limit. All you have to do is consume and consume and consume. I've seen billboards in India and in front of new supermarkets that are coming up by the day, and they say happiness for sale. You can't sell happiness. You can't buy happiness. You can live happiness. You can be happy. So the first lesson I have learned from Amalura, from Terra Madre, from Mother Earth, is that she's not a machine. Yes, you agree, totally agree with you. She's not a machine. She's not put together by someone else. She is self-organizing, she's self-emerging. The mechanistic paradigm, which is the paradigm of capitalist patriarchy, is based on two assumptions. The first is terra nullius. The earth is empty. The earth is dead. The earth is inert. And this is introduced in every facet of life. Soil is empty. The seed is empty. Your head is empty. Just has to be filled up somehow. So there's a dead earth paradigm, that the life is made up of separable, immutable parts and can be understood through a fragmented and reductionist approach to each part without recognizing their relationships and interactions. And then the different parts of different things can be put together like a little Lego set. That's the central issue of genetic engineering. I remember in one of my first talks on GMOs, I said life is not a Lego. Life is self-organized from within. Each part can be manipulated mechanically without looking at the adverse effects on the organism or the system and without ecological consequences. Such a paradigm is based on separation, division, fragmentation, atomization, and absolutism of fixed, unchanging properties. But life is about dynamic change. Nothing is static, not for a second. Everything is evolving every moment. Everything is being created and maintaining itself according to the life. 90% of our cells are getting reproduced on a daily basis. But they don't just disappear. The leaves of these plants are getting renewed all the time. The older leaves fall and new ones come. And while the older leaves are green, they are creating life. They hold the technology of life. Because technology merely means tools of transformation. A technology does not mean an anthropocentric tool. It never said it's only what man makes. And it never says that which can control other humans or nature. And that's how we, these days, refer to technology. And interestingly, it's only in the last 20 years I have watched the term technology being used without description. Till that time, if there was a discussion on technology, we would always say, this is a technology to do this using these resources and this energy. You always describe the whole process. But suddenly, it became magical 20 years ago. And now it's a technology. Do you have technology? I said, of course, everything living every moment has technology. This idea of, do you have technology? Suggesting that somehow, do you get controlled by us? Yeah? So technology has got elevated to a level where it's performing a role of religion for a new breed. When I wrote my book, Biopiracy, I called it the second coming of Columbus. Because, Columbus was given a little, what they call the open letter. In fact, the original word patent comes from that. Letters patent, the open letter. Because usually the letters were closed because they had a seal and they were about wars or marriages. That's all. That's all the royalty were doing in Europe. Either getting married to each other or trying to kill each other. And the sealed letters were always between royalties, their communication to each other. Whereas the open letter was declaring the rest of the world as property. It was called the doctrine of discovery. Columbus discovered America, where there were indigenous people forever. And the idea of patent then is derived from that, that there are the plants in the world, the microbes in the world, the seeds in the world, and yet a few people, particularly those who make chemicals, are now declaring not only that we've discovered the seed, we've invented it. For them, GMO, the genetically modified organism, is a message to whoever you see as the creator, God, move over. Because now we are the creators of life, we will collect the royalties, we will decide what farmers will grow, and we will decide what farmers can't grow. And that's the reason I started Vandana in 1987. So we have this strange ideology of mechanophilia, loving the machine, replacing loving Mother Earth. Yeah? And with while the mechanistic worldview is based on the mastery and conquest over nature, my work in quantum theory was understanding how the quantum world is different. It's not mechanical, it is not predictable, it is not based on separation, it is not based on either or. And the quantum world is based on non-separability. And in terms of understanding and measurement, there is no separation between what's being observed and the observer. They make each other. Whereas the mechanistic world, there's objects, inert, fixed, and among the objects are Mother Earth as a whole, women, working people, peasants, indigenous people, they're all objects for manipulation on the one hand, but Today, the project is extinction. Earlier it was, we will manipulate you, but now it is, well, you're totally redundant. Yeah? You're totally redundant. Even though, and that's the interesting thing, even though more resources are being used now than ever before, but there's an invisibilization of terra nullius, yeah? That you don't matter. So take something simple, and I'm sure in the afternoon roundtable we'll have more discussion, and I won't talk too much about it. But take something like a shift from a car that runs on petrol to a car that's an electric car. Did you get rid of the resources and materials? No. Did you reduce your footprint? No, you expanded it. Because now you need new materials, which you don't talk about. And where do you get those materials from? Lands you can colonize. Lands far away where you can literally hide the impact and not talk to the people. And the stories that come from lithium mining and how destructive it is of water systems, how destructive it is in terms of ecosystems. And the alternate, so from the powerful, which happen to be powerful rich men, from them flows through history, from the time of Bacon and others, the mechanical worldview, which is being deepened to different spheres of life. Right now, the entire invasion into living organisms, through genetic engineering, through synthetic biology, they are all new forms of redefining living systems as machines and trying to engineer them. And it begins from the microbes all the way to Gaia, the earth, that she too has to be engineered now that there's climate change. Let's just put more pollution. Yeah, so here's a pollution problem which is destroying the climate. How do we solve it? Introduce more pollution. These, putting aerosols in the sky to dim the sun, they call it, is wrong at 3 levels. First, more pollution is not a solution to pollution. Reducing pollution is the solution to pollution. Secondly, you have done something that the mechanical thought always does, which is blame the source of life as the source of the problem. In this particular case, the source of life, all that light shining on those leaves is the gift of the sun. That's what makes photosynthesis happen. That interaction between the green leaf, photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, and the sunlight. That's the magic of life. That's where the molecules of life are being created every moment. Dimming the sun is the problem. Block the sun. And I think about 10 years ago, I had a debate with a Nobel laureate who is part of pushing this geoengineering, engineering the planet as a whole. And when I said, you don't want to block the sun, but what's going to happen to the plants? What's going to happen to food? What's going to happen to everything that depends on the sun for photosynthesis? And he said, that's not my project. And that's another problem. For the powerful, an assignment given by money for making more money is the project. For the earth, living and regenerating life is the project. For women who work with the awareness that we are part of the earth, the project is life in all its inclusions. You can't say my project was dimming the sun and how plants will be impacted. I'm not going to look at it. So we have an ecological paradigm. It is what has guided my work, and it's informed both by ancient wisdom systems and by emerging sciences, both sciences like the quantum thinking, as well as sciences of emergent biology of living systems. Because even though there has been a century attempt to make biology deterministic, and with the determinism to make it sexist, to make it patriarchal, to make it racist, to put other life out of intelligent world. And the biases are huge, but for me it's quite fascinating that in spite of that, we have new thinking in biology of living systems. Now I've lived through these processes because I'd never studied biology. I haven't done a single class in biology. All my classes have been out in nature. All my classes have been in community. And nature and the women have been my teachers for all of these years. But I haven't actually sat and, during my school or college, ever studied biology as a discipline. But I've had to deal a lot with biology. Taught myself a lot when I was dealing with with genetic engineering. And where I didn't have the understanding, I talked to friends who had backgrounds in genetic engineering. And they taught me. And the reason we were able to build a good, strong scientific critique of the impacts of genetically engineered organisms is because we worked with the scientists who knew the subject. Every person who has talked about the hazards of genetic engineering is a person who's done genetic engineering. There's a person called Terje Travik up north in Norway. There used to be a wonderful woman down in UK, two people actually, May Wan Ho and Brian Goodwin. So they're people. And I say, you cannot lock down thinking, you cannot lock down intelligence, you cannot lock down seeking. They're part of life and they carry on. And that's why there's all this bursting of new knowledge of living systems. Even though 500 years have been spent trying to tell us the earth is dead, the earth is dead, the earth is dead. The earth speaks and there are enough people to study and observe. So the sciences of living systems are emerging. And all of them are converging on a set of principles. Ancient knowledge and the new emerging knowledges are focusing on the same thing. They might have different instruments. The indigenous knowledge will be able to observe with their whole being and know what's going on. The scientists today will have not just microscope, they'll have electron microscopes, they'll have more and more sophisticated systems. But the tools of observation are different. But the patterns being recognized are the same. And the diversity still has common basis. The mechanistic philosophy evolved hand. There's a narrative about knowledge that in typical history of science, we're always told there was a contest between the church and science in Europe. Not at all true. The church and the new emerging mechanistic ideal were one at the same time. Let me just share you some quotes. A mechanistic philosophy evolved hand in hand with empire building, with colonialism, and was central to the project of establishing this is how they described it, mechanistic philosophy, the empire of man over inferior creatures of God. We don't think so, Peacock. We don't think you're inferior. In fact, we have, one of our deities is Krishna, and the peacock feather is always a symbol. Yeah? So Robert Boyle was a scientist, but he was also the head of the New England Church. And he was the first director of the institute created for science, Royal Society. And this is what he said, we've got to establish our superiority over inferior creatures of God. And then he went on to say, and among the lesser creatures he saw were women, all non-Western cultures, and all non-human beings, all. And as he wrote, and in his lectures, he said, the idea that the earth is sacred and all her beings are sacred is an interference in establishing our empire. Of course it will be an interference. If I realize that the peacock has its place in this park, I'm not going to take out a gun and shoot it dead. I think under the current laws, probably I'll get arrested if trying to do it. But everyone was rewarded for doing it because they were lesser creatures, and you were getting rid of the world of exactly the same urge that came to Hitler to get rid of lesser people. People who were inferior, who were going to contaminate the superior race. What was the agenda? And what are the tools they evolved? They evolved toxic gases to kill the people. That's the birth of modern industrial chemistry, and it is the basis of every agrochemical we use in agriculture. And that's why my work of ecofeminism, my work in ecology, has taken me to the work in agriculture and on seeds. There's some wonderful women who have studied the capitalist patriarchal base of this mechanistic science. Sandra Hardin has called it a Western bourgeois masculine project. Masculine is the word that Bacon gave to his own. The birth of masculine science. It wasn't just science. He called it the birth of masculine time. The time itself from now onwards. would be shaped by patriarchy. And Evelyn Fox Keller has said science was produced by a particular subset of the human race that is almost entirely by white middle-class males. For the founding fathers of modern science, the reliance on language of gender was explicit. They sought philosophy that deserved to be called masculine, that could be distinguished from its ineffective precedence by its virile powers of wiping out lesser creatures. That was the agenda. Its capacity to bind nature to man's service and to make her his slave. So it isn't just human slaves. The entire paradigm was turning all of nature into a slave. That's what Bacon is saying. Come, I will teach you how to make nature your slave. And then they created a royal society whose only purpose was to try and enslave nature. So let me just share with you the principles that I have learned both through my practice as well as through the amazing emerging literature. Is first, the earth is self-organized. And there's a Chilean and Spanish author called Maturana and Varela. I would suggest you must find their book and read it, because it's broken the Boyle thesis, wipe out the lesser creatures. And they're basically saying, wherever there's life, there's intelligence. I think one of them is a neuroscientist. Wherever there's life, there's intelligence. Life is intelligence. On the contrary, the mechanistic systems are based on what they call allopoietic, externally controlled. And in fact, if you ask me, a large part of the debate for the European elections is around this issue of centralization and some powers that you don't control, setting the agenda for you, you know? And yet our old political naming doesn't take that into account. No political definition takes centralization and democracy as what you should be looking at. They define culture as what defines society. But culture flows from the way you think, live, act. Nature does not know monocultures. She knows monocultures, but she doesn't adopt them. Nature is always diversity, always diversity. Nothing in nature is separate. Everything in nature is interconnected in living processes, not in a static way. And those living processes was symbiosis, that each helps each other. So when a plant grows and you haven't sprayed chemicals, I'm sure studies are done in this park, the soil will be full of mycorrhiza, a fungi, which brings nutrients from 8 miles away and doesn't ever let any plant be deprived. It doesn't belong only to one plant, it feeds all of them. And now they're doing new research where they're using all kinds of tracer elements. So they starve a plant, but the plant doesn't get starved, because what the humans are putting in is only a part of it. The reality of nutrition is being brought by the fungi, and they know which plant needs more nutrition, and they'll bring it somehow. So they build community. And symbiosis is the mutual benefits. So, trees give the carbohydrates to the fungi, but the fungi bring all the nutrition from wherever they can find. And the soil is actually not an empty system. It's full of minerals. It's just that the plants can't take it up without this mediation by organisms. In nature, there is nothing like linear extraction, just taking one way. Everything in nature is a cycle. Nutrition is a cycle. Energy is a cycle. Water is a cycle. And all local economies of all indigenous people have been based on working the way nature works, and therefore they've had circular economies. And that's what we have to build for the future. Create local circular economies where things flow, constantly flow. And of course, contrary to what Boyle was saying, respect and reverence is what you have when you respect the integrity, the autonomy, the sentient beings of all our earth relatives. We relate through respect, reverence, love, compassion. Whereas in the mechanical worldview, you've reduced everything to objects that you can use as raw material. And always, all living systems are what I call multidimensional. They're not doing one thing at a time. These trees are giving us oxygen, but they're also giving us control over, they're managing the water flow. They're managing the nutrition flow. They're giving us beauty. Everything in life is multidimensional. But the market looks only for one dimension that can feed the commodity. So that's why you see the violence against animals. They just want one part of the animal. They want either just milk or they just want meat, or one kind of meat. From the chicken, we did a book for children when globalization started, because the whole factory farming started of chicken. We only have the chicken factory farming. We did a little booklet called The Tale of Two Chicken. One was a free-range chicken, Rani, and the other was an actual chicken from a factory farm who had been thrown out. And this little booklet became so popular with children. Children made plays on it. Children wrote songs on it. And then we had protests against Kentucky Fried Chicken. Nobody wanted Kentucky Fried Chicken. And for the first bit, they were shut down. We shut down McDonald's and Kentucky Fried Chicken in the initial stages. The reducing living sentient beings to producers of commodities, that is only one function. We did the research at that time that chicken are either, the factory farm is either for eggs or for chicken meat. If it's for eggs, the males don't count. So you know what they do? As soon as the male is born, as soon as the chicken is born, they identify if it's a male, they gas it. They gas it to death. And for all chicken who have to be in factory farms, because when you treat living organisms violently, it breeds more violence. And in the factory farming system, they call it cannibalism. Now, chicken need beaks because they pick up food with beaks. They're going around, and I'm sure the meat cook is doing that too. You pick up the worms, you pick up whatever you need to eat with your beak. But when you put them into a concentration camps, the beak becomes something they attack each other with. So, besides killing all the male for the egg farm, they burn the beaks of every chicken. They burn the beaks, hundreds of degrees. They just put the beak against a hot metal. So violence is a very necessary part of this mechanistic thought. It is militaristic by nature, and it is one-dimensional, it's extractive, and it only takes. I could describe what's happened to the chicken, to trees, to plants, to food, and we can, in the discussion, go there. But because everything is interconnected and everything flows, you can never say, this tree is this static object, because it is based on multiple relationships of flow in every direction, in energy, in sunlight, in nutrition, in water, in care, especially when the ecosystem has humans as part of it. Care is a very important element. And because all these multiple flows are happening, no part of nature can belong to any private individual. Therefore, to treat it as private property is another colonial error. I talked about it yesterday, but the idea of owning the earth, parts of the earth, is violative of the earth. It violates the earth, but it violates basic human thinking, because everything's connected. So commons are the nature of nature. The earth is a commons created by the flows that the earth has created for the benefit of all, to be shared within the limits of renewability. And there was a horrible paper written in the 70s when I started my ecological work. It used to be called The Tragedy of the Commons. A man called Garrett Hardin, I don't think he'd ever stepped into a commons. I don't think he had ever seen a community. He just assumed the Adam Smith assumption that we are born with greed. And because we are born with greed, then greed drives us, and therefore, in the commons, we'll all degrade. Have people degraded this park? No, it's an open park where everyone is walking through, but they have respect for the park. The kids can make a lot of noise, more noise than the peacock, but that's part of the commons. We are not born with greed. We are born with love. We are born with compassion. And we can continue to cultivate it or extinguish it. And second, a commons is not an open access thing. It is a community managed place where communities regulate themselves on the rules of how to use it. I have watched commons where they will decide which months of the year they will never ever even enter the forest, because that is when the new medicinal plants are coming up and they don't want them to be exploited. What are the months where the grass will not be taken? What are the months when the grass will be taken, but in what quantity? What are the months when you will harvest the wild fruit? And what are the months where you can't? That is how rules of the commons and commoning have constantly replenished the earth People who do fishing in the oceans have rules of how not to overfish, which months to not fish, because that's when the fishes stop spawning and the nurseries are getting born. The people who deal with medicines have very strict rules about when not to harvest a plant, because that is when it's seeding and renewing. So they have knowledge, but with knowledge they have rules that come from the cycles of the earth. And there isn't that much place where this knowledge is there. That's why I always say, right now we have the last generation of wise women in the world. We've even done studies that women below 60 right now can't recognize the plants in the ecosystem. Because the fashion now is, how to buy I've never painted my nails, I've never, but here in a remote village, there's no fashion show, nothing. Young women are painting their nails and refusing to go into the forest to learn from their grandmothers, because that's an issue of internalization, of superiority and inferiority. That if you somehow consume your superior, if you are part of co-creation of life, and you're part of nature, then you adopt the capitalist patriarchal idea that being part of nature is inferiority. That's the shift we have to make. And that's the reason I've dedicated so much of my life to regenerating living soil, living seed, understanding living food. That living food is, in Indian philosophy, we talk of food as Brahma. Food is the creator. It creates your life. It creates your mind. And I think talk to any grandmother in any culture, and you'll have new languages, like we have new languages of Mother Earth, of Amalura. We will have languages that will tell us, you are what you eat. There's no separation. Food is not a commodity. Food is the living embodiment of all the relationships in nature and all the relationships in the human community. It's distilled in food. If that food holds the caring, compassionate relationship of all beings and all people, it is what will regenerate your health. If that food represents systems of greed, exploitation, poison, it will poison you. Our body and the earth's body are not separate. And the body is not inferior. The body is part of intelligence. So, Descartes said, I'm a thinking thing without a body. He cut off the body. And the violence against women is intimately tied to a metaphysics where the body was put down. But in all deep knowledge systems, we are integral beings. Our mind and body is one. There's no separation. And our mind and body as integral beings is one with the mind and body of an amazing universe. The earth too has her mind and bodies. Every being in the earth has her mind and body. And they have intelligence. So on the one hand, the dominant system is coming to new levels of violence, new levels of control, new levels of destruction, new levels of irresponsibility. And yet the emergence from the earth, from indigenous people, from women's movements, from groups like you in this room, there is a re-emergence of the awareness that the earth is living, we are part of it. And because the earth is living, she is regenerative, we can be part of the process of regeneration. And that is where our power lies. Thank you.